Overcoming together, the journey of healing and transformation. Is it possible to carry the weight of silence without losing oneself in it? My name is Lily, and my brother's name is Ethan. We have been through things that no one should have to experience. It wasn't a typical childhood. We lost our parents early on, and since then, it's been just the two of us against the world. We've never had the luxury of relying on anyone else, and that fact shaped us in ways I'm only starting to understand. Today was just like any other. Ethan had gone to work in the city, as usual, selling electronics. He was a hard worker, driven, but I always saw something in him, something broken, buried deep beneath his strong exterior. I couldn't help but notice that he had grown quieter, lately more distant. We were always close, but now it seemed like he was slipping further away, as though some invisible wall was rising between us. It worried me. I spent my days working from home, writing articles for a content agency. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. Yet, deep inside, I felt like I wasn't truly living. There was an ache in my chest that didn't seem to go away, no matter how much I buried myself in work. My loneliness, my longing for connection, those things had grown too loud to ignore. It had been like this for months. Little things would set us off, small disagreements, moments of silence that stretched too long. I didn't know how to approach Ethan anymore. He didn't seem interested in talking, and every time I tried, it felt like I was speaking to a wall. It was exhausting, emotionally draining. That afternoon, as I was working, I heard the familiar sound of the door opening. Ethan had come home early. I looked up, expecting him to be his usual self, but there was something different about him today. His face was drawn, his posture tense. He walked in quietly, his eyes avoiding mine. "Ethan, is everything okay?" I asked, pushing my chair back from the desk. His eyes met mine for just a brief moment before he looked away again. "I don't know, Lily," he said softly, his voice low and full of something I couldn't place. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. About everything, really." I stood up concerned. Ethan wasn't one to open up easily, especially about personal things. I could feel my heart racing as I walked towards him. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound calm, even though I was internally panicking. I needed to understand. I needed him to talk. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair as if unsure of how to continue. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know how to keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I don't know how to keep going like this, pretending like I'm not falling apart inside. I don't know how to fix things. Maybe I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing anymore." My stomach dropped. His words were a punch to the gut. Ethan, the person I always thought was the strong one, the person who had always kept us together, was breaking down in front of me. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that we could work through this together, but I felt paralyzed. How could I help him when I felt so lost myself? "I don't know how to help you, Ethan," I said, my voice breaking. "I've been trying to hold it all together, but I don't know what to do either. I don't know." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. It was like a wall had come down, and I could see the boy who had once been my protector, the one who had always made sure I was okay. That boy was still in there, buried beneath the weight of everything he had been carrying. And for the first time in a long time, I could see his pain. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, his voice soft but full of emotion. "I never meant to shut you out. I never meant to hurt you. I've just been trying so hard to keep it all together that I didn't even realize I was falling apart." I could feel the tears threatening to spill from my eyes, but I held them back. I stepped toward him slowly, unsure of what to say or do, but instinctively, I reached out and placed my hand on his. He didn't pull away. "It's okay, Ethan. It's okay to feel lost sometimes. We've been through so much, and we've both been carrying so much pain. We don't have to keep pretending we're okay when we're not. We don't have to do this alone. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. We stood in silence for a moment, just holding each other's gaze, and in that silence, I knew we had taken the first step towards healing. But I also knew that it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be long, and we would have to face many challenges. But now, at least, we were facing them together. And maybe that was enough. Can we really change if we're constantly running from our pain? Or is it only when we face it that we can start to heal? The days that followed that conversation were both strange and familiar. Strange because the walls that had separated Ethan and me for so long seemed to crumble in an instant, leaving us standing in the middle of a vast, open space. Familiar because for the first time in a while, I could see the person I once knew, the person who had been my protector and my best friend. It was as if we had just woken up from a long, deep sleep, and we were unsure of how to begin again. The night after our conversation, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with all the thoughts and emotions I had kept buried for so long. I had spent so much time focusing on Ethan's struggles that I had neglected my own. For the first time in years, I found myself confronting my own feelings of loneliness, of longing for something more than just survival. I had been so focused on keeping everything together that I had never really asked myself what I needed or what I wanted. It was easy to push those feelings aside in the chaos of daily life, but now they were demanding my attention. I realized that, like Ethan, I too had been hiding from my own pain, hoping that if I just kept moving forward, things would get better on their own. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Ethan and I hadn't talked much in the days after our confrontation. We had both needed time to process everything, but we had made a promise to each other, to be honest, to face our pain together, and to start taking small steps toward healing. I wasn't sure where that journey would take us, but I knew we couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. The next morning, as I was sipping my coffee at the kitchen table, I heard Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. He walked into the kitchen, looking a little more awake than usual, but still carrying the weight of something heavy on his shoulders. He avoided my gaze at first, as if unsure of what to say. I didn't want to push him, but I also didn't want to leave things hanging. We had opened the door to something big, and now it was time to walk through it, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. Ethan, we can't keep pretending, I said quietly, breaking the silence between us. We both need to face what's been going on. I know it's hard, but we can't ignore it anymore. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in days. There was an honesty in his expression, something raw and unfiltered that made my heart ache. I know, he replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've been avoiding it, but I can't anymore. I've been carrying this for too long, and it's starting to break me. I could see the vulnerability in him, something he had always kept hidden beneath his tough exterior. It was a side of him I hadn't seen in years, and honestly, it frightened me. But I knew that in order to heal, we both had to be willing to face the truth, no matter how difficult it was. I don't know how to fix it, he continued, his voice shaking slightly. I don't know how to fix myself. You don't have to fix anything, Ethan, I said softly. You don't have to do it alone, either. We'll figure it out together. We'll take it one step at a time. For a moment, there was silence between us, but it wasn't the heavy, uncomfortable silence we had lived with for so long. It was a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement that we were both broken in our own ways, but we were no longer alone in our pain. We were finally willing to face it together. Ethan took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Okay, he said finally, his voice firm, though still tinged with uncertainty. I'm ready. I want to try. I don't want to keep living like this. A wave of relief washed over me. I had been so afraid that he would shut down again, that we would fall back into our old patterns. But now, I could see a spark of hope in his eyes, a small but significant shift in his mindset. He was ready to begin the journey of healing, and I was ready to walk that path with him. That afternoon, we decided to take a break from our usual routine. We both needed space to process everything, but we also needed to take action, small, meaningful steps toward change. We went for a walk in the park, something we hadn't done in ages. The fresh air felt different now, as if it carried a new sense of possibility. As we walked, we talked about everything and nothing at all. We didn't need to say much. The simple act of being together, of sharing space without the weight of unresolved tension, was enough. I've been so focused on surviving, Lily, Ethan admitted, his voice barely audible as we walked side by side, on getting through each day without falling apart. But I've realized I've been missing something important. I've been missing the connection, the real connection with you, with myself. I know what you mean, I said, my heart aching with the truth of his words. I've been doing the same thing. I've been so caught up in trying to make everything work that I forgot to take care of myself. There it was, the heart of the problem. We had both been so focused on keeping everything together that we had neglected ourselves. We had put on a facade of strength for so long that we had forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to show up for each other in a way that was real and raw. But that was changing now. We were both ready to face the truth, to stop pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. And that was the first step toward healing. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, we stopped and sat on a bench. The world around us seemed to slow down, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from everything being perfect. It was the kind of peace that came from acceptance, accepting our flaws, our mistakes, and our brokenness. We can't change everything overnight, I said quietly, looking at Ethan. But we can start today. We can start by being honest with ourselves and with each other. And that's enough. He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude, and something else, hope. You're right, he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. One step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I believed that we could heal, that we could rebuild our relationship and our lives one step at a time. How many times have we built walls to protect ourselves, only to realize they trap us in the end? The days after our walk in the park felt like a small shift, a quiet change in the air. Ethan and I had made a promise to each other, to face our pain, to stop hiding from it, and to rebuild the trust that had been lost over the years. But as the days passed, I began to realize that healing was not going to be as simple as we had hoped. It wasn't that we didn't want to heal or that we didn't try. It was just that the weight of our past, the years of silence, the unspoken resentment, and the shared grief, it all hung between us like an invisible force, shaping the way we interacted with each other. No matter how much we tried to push past it, we kept bumping into it over and over again. I had thought that once we talked, once we admitted our pain, things would somehow fall into place. But the reality was more complicated. It was easy to say that we would heal, that we would be honest with each other. But it was much harder to actually do it. One evening, after another long day, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the TV screen without really watching it. Ethan was at work again, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing him as my brother and started seeing him as someone I had to fix, someone I had to help. It was like I had taken on the responsibility of carrying both of our burdens, and I didn't know how to put it down. I tried to distract myself with my work, but my mind kept drifting back to Ethan. What was he thinking? What was he feeling? Why hadn't he said anything more since our conversation? Was he just waiting for me to fix everything? Or was he simply too afraid to face the depth of what he was going through? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Ethan had come home earlier than usual. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking tired but also distant, as though something was weighing on him that he couldn't share. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual. "How was work today?" He gave a small shrug, not meeting my eyes. "Same as always." I could tell that something was off. Ethan wasn't one to be so closed off, especially not with me. We used to talk about everything, about work, about life, about our dreams for the future. But now, it felt like there was an invisible wall between us, one that neither of us knew how to break down. I set the remote control down on the coffee table and stood up. "Ethan, is something bothering you? You've been acting distant lately." He stiffened, and for a brief moment I thought he might walk away. But then he sighed and walked over to the couch, collapsing onto it with a heavy exhale. "It's nothing," he said quickly, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just tired." I sat down next to him, feeling the distance between us grow even wider. "You know you can talk to me, right?" I said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes focused on the floor. I could feel the tension in his body, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on him. And for the first time in a while, I didn't know how to reach him. It felt like he had built a wall around himself, a wall that was so thick I couldn't get through it. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Lily," he said suddenly, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't know how to keep going, how to keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not." I felt a pang in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I feel like I'm drowning, like I'm carrying so much, and I don't know how to let it go. And the worst part is, I don't know if I can fix it. I don't know if I can fix myself." I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of being broken beyond repair. I knew that feeling all too well, but I also knew that we couldn't keep running from our pain, that we couldn't keep pretending that things would get better on their own. If we wanted to heal, we had to face it together. "You don't have to fix yourself, Ethan," I said gently, reaching out to touch his arm. "None of us are perfect. We don't have to have it all together, but we can take it one day at a time, and we can help each other." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, but then something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, as if he was finally allowing himself to see the truth that we didn't have to do this alone, that we could lean on each other. "I'm scared, Lily," he admitted quietly. "I'm scared that if I let go of this anger, this frustration, I won't know who I am anymore. I've built this wall around myself for so long that I don't know how to take it down." I nodded, understanding more than he knew. I had spent so many years building walls too, walls that kept me safe, but also kept me isolated. But now, I realized that the only way to heal, to truly heal, was to break those walls down, piece by piece. "We'll take it down together," I said firmly. "We'll start by being honest with each other, and then we'll figure out the rest as we go. One step at a time." He gave a small, tentative smile, and for the first time in days, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. It was fragile, but it was there. "Okay," he said softly, "one step at a time." How much of our present is shaped by the past? Can we truly let go of what's holding us back? Or does it always have a hold on us? The days that followed felt like we were taking slow, tentative steps forward. Ethan and I had both agreed to face our pain, but every time we tried to move beyond it, it was as if we were pulled back by the weight of our past. The walls we had built for protection were not easily torn down, and even though we were trying, I could see the struggle in Ethan's eyes. He was still holding on to something I couldn't yet understand. It wasn't that he didn't want to heal. I knew he did. But every time he tried to move past the anger, the frustration, the disappointment that had built up over the years, something seemed to pull him back, as if those emotions had a life of their own. They clung to him like shadows, and no matter how hard he tried to shake them off, they stayed there, lurking in the corners of his mind. I had my own battles to face, too. I had thought that if I just helped Ethan, if I just took care of him, everything else would fall into place. But I had neglected to confront my own demons. I had been so focused on fixing his broken pieces that I had ignored the cracks in my own soul. I wasn't perfect, and neither was he. We were both wounded, both searching for a way to heal, but we couldn't do it if we didn't acknowledge the things that were holding us back. It was one evening as I sat on the couch and stared at the blank TV screen that it hit me. Ethan and I had been so focused on what had gone wrong that we hadn't really talked about what we needed from each other, what we needed from ourselves. We had been running from the truth for so long that it felt like we had forgotten how to face it. That night, after I heard the familiar sound of the front door opening, I knew that we had to talk. No more avoiding the hard stuff. We had to face it together. Ethan, I called out as I heard him walk into the living room. He looked tired, as usual, but there was something different in his expression. A heaviness that wasn't there before. "Hey," he said quietly, rubbing his eyes. I stood up from the couch and looked at him, trying to read his expression. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I know we've been taking small steps, but it feels like we're still stuck. I don't think we can move forward until we face everything that's weighing on us." He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from mine. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the inner battle between wanting to open up and the fear of being vulnerable. But I knew that if we were ever going to heal, we had to start somewhere. "I know," he said finally, his voice low, "but I don't know where to start. It's like I'm carrying this weight, and I don't know how to put it down. I've been holding on to so much for so long that I don't even know what it feels like to be free of it." I could see the pain in his eyes, the burden that had been building inside him for years. It wasn't just the loss of our parents. It wasn't just the weight of responsibility that he had taken on as the older sibling. It was everything, the disappointment, the regret, the guilt. All of it had piled up, and now it was suffocating him. "I understand," I said softly, my voice breaking with the empathy I felt. "I've been carrying my own weight too, Ethan. We don't have to do this alone. We don't have to fix everything at once. But we can't keep pretending like nothing's wrong. We have to face it." He sat down on the couch, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was too much to bear. I sat down beside him, close enough to feel his presence, but not so close that it felt intrusive. He needed space, and I needed to give it to him. "I'm scared, Lily," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared that if I face all this, I won't be able to handle it, that it'll break me completely." I felt a surge of compassion, a deep understanding of what he was going through. I knew what it felt like to be on the edge, to feel like you were losing control of everything. But I also knew that we couldn't stay there forever. "We're not alone in this," I said gently. "We've got each other, and we'll figure it out. It's okay to be scared, but we have to take that first step. We have to trust that, even though it's hard, facing the truth is the only way we can move forward." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if he was trying to find some kind of reassurance. And maybe in that moment he found it, because after a long silence, he finally spoke again. "Okay," he said softly, his voice steadier now. "Okay, let's try." That was the turning point. It wasn't some grand epiphany, and it wasn't some magical moment of sudden clarity. But it was a start. It was the moment when Ethan finally admitted that he couldn't carry the weight of his pain alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. The rest of the evening passed quietly. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't fix anything. But we had opened the door to something bigger, a chance to truly heal together. The next few days were filled with small but meaningful changes. We began to talk more openly about our past, about our fears, and about what we needed from each other. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of the past felt too much to bear. But each time we shared a little more of ourselves, we took another step toward healing. I knew that we weren't done yet. There was still a long road ahead of us. But for the first time in a while, I had hope. I had hope that if we kept facing the truth, we could rebuild our lives, one step at a time. How often do we carry the weight of others' expectations? And how long can we keep bearing it before it breaks us? The days after that conversation felt like a fragile truce. Ethan and I had started down the path of healing, but we both knew that there was still so much left unsaid. Each step forward felt like it was shadowed by the burdens we carried, burdens that we hadn't fully acknowledged yet. The truth was that healing wasn't just about facing the past. It was also about facing the future and the responsibilities that came with it. I could see the strain in Ethan's eyes every time he came home from work. He was still doing his best to support both of us, to keep everything together, but it was starting to take its toll. I had always admired his strength, but I also knew that he was burning himself out. He couldn't keep going like this, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. But he didn't know how to ask for help, and I wasn't sure how to offer it without making him feel like he was failing. I wasn't immune to the pressures either. I was doing my best to keep up with my own studies and responsibilities, but deep down, I felt like I was sinking under the weight of it all. We were so used to taking care of each other, to being the only two people who understood what we'd been through, that we had forgotten how to share the load. Instead, we were both carrying everything, our grief, our pain, our responsibilities, alone. I tried to keep myself busy, but it didn't work. The silence between us was growing thicker. Every day, we had talked, yes, but we hadn't really listened to each other. We hadn't asked the hard questions. We hadn't given ourselves permission to be vulnerable, to truly let go of the masks we had been wearing for so long. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table trying to focus on my assignments, I heard the familiar sound of the front door opening. Ethan had come home, but this time he didn't sound like his usual self. The tiredness in his voice was more pronounced, and there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. A sense of defeat, perhaps. "Hey, how was work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't respond immediately. I looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his eyes distant, as if he was looking right through me. "It was fine," he said, his voice flat. "Just exhausting." I set my pen down and looked at him more closely. There was something in his expression that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper, something that had been building for a long time. "Ethan, talk to me," I said, my voice more urgent now. "What's going on?" He hesitated, as if he was debating whether to open up or not. For a moment, I thought he might walk away, but then he sighed deeply and walked over to the kitchen table, sitting down heavily across from me. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Lily," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm tired of pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I've been carrying so much for so long, and I don't know if I can keep holding it all together." I felt my heart break for him. He was so used to being the strong one, the one who kept everything together, that he had forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to ask for help. "You don't have to do it alone," I said softly. "I'm here. We're in this together." He shook his head. his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. I don't want to burden you. You've already got enough on your plate with school and everything. I don't want to drag you down too. I could hear the guilt in his voice, and it made my chest tighten. I knew he was trying to protect me, but in doing so, he was pushing me away. He was carrying all of it on his own, even though we were supposed to be in this together. Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside me. I'm not going anywhere. You're not a burden to me. We've been through so much together, and I want to be here for you. I need to be here for you. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, as if he was trying to figure out if I truly meant it. The doubt in his gaze was almost too much to bear. But what if I can't fix it? He asked quietly. What if I'm too broken to be helped? I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his. You're not broken, Ethan. You're just hurting, and it's okay to admit that. It's okay to need help. There was a long silence between us as we sat there, holding on to each other in a way that felt both comforting and painful. For so long, we had been trying to protect each other from the weight of our pain, but now I realized that the only way we could heal was by sharing that weight, by being honest with each other. I've been afraid, Lily, he said finally, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. Afraid that if I let go of everything I've been holding on to, I won't know who I am anymore. I've built so many walls around myself, and now that they're starting to come down, I don't know what's going to be left. I squeezed his hand gently, trying to offer him some comfort. It's okay to be afraid. We'll figure it out. But we have to do it together. You don't have to carry this alone. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll try for you. And in that moment, I realized something. Healing wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending like it didn't exist. It was about taking small steps together and being willing to face the hard truths. It was about letting go of the fear and embracing the possibility of healing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally on the same path, walking side by side, ready to face whatever came next. What happens when we refuse to speak the truth? Can silence really protect us, or does it only make the wounds deeper? The days after Ethan and I had that conversation felt like we were moving in slow motion. There was a strange kind of peace between us, but it was fragile, like a glass bridge that could shatter at any moment. We had opened the door to our pain, but now the hardest part was figuring out how to walk through it without getting lost. It was a painful process, one that required more honesty than I had ever thought possible. Ethan was still struggling. I could see it in the way he walked into the house, the way he tried to mask his fatigue with a forced smile. He was trying, I could tell, but the weight of his emotions was still too heavy for him to carry alone. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how to break through the walls he had built around himself. I, too, was feeling the strain. The silence between us wasn't helping. We had stopped fighting, yes, but we hadn't really started healing yet. There were so many things we hadn't said, so many emotions that were still tangled up inside of us. And the longer we went without addressing them, the harder it became to speak the truth. It was one evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, that I realized how much we had been avoiding the real conversation. We had talked around it, but never really about it. We had acknowledged the past, yes, but we hadn't yet addressed what was holding us back from truly moving forward. I felt a sudden pang of frustration. How had we gotten here? Why were we still tiptoeing around the things that needed to be said? The truth was we were afraid of what would happen if we opened up too much, afraid of what we might uncover. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if we didn't speak the truth soon, we were going to lose each other. The silence between us was growing thicker, and the weight of it was suffocating. That night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. As Ethan came home from work, I knew that we had to have the conversation. There was no more dancing around the issue. It was time to face it. Ethan, I said as soon as he walked in the door, we need to talk. He looked at me, surprise flickering in his eyes. He had grown used to me being quiet, to us pretending like everything was fine, even when it wasn't. I could tell he wasn't sure if he was ready for another conversation like the one we had had days before. But we couldn't avoid it any longer. About what? He asked, his voice cautious but curious. About everything, I said, my voice firm. About the way we've been handling things. About the silence. About what we're really feeling. He hesitated, looking down at the floor for a moment. I could see the internal battle happening inside him. He wanted to talk, I could tell, but the fear of opening up was still there. I don't know if I can do this, Lily, he said quietly. I don't know if I can face everything I've been avoiding for so long. I felt a knot form in my chest. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure how to break through the walls he had built. He was scared, and I didn't want to push him too hard. Ethan, I said softly, trying to make my voice as gentle as possible, I know it's hard, but if we don't face this now, we'll just keep living in this silence. We'll keep pretending like everything's fine, and we both know it's not. We're carrying this weight, and I think it's time we let it go. He was silent for a long time, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He didn't want to talk about it, but at the same time, he knew I was right. The silence was only making things worse. We needed to speak the truth, no matter how difficult it was. Finally, he sighed and sat down at the table. Okay, he said quietly. Let's talk. It wasn't an easy conversation. We both stumbled through our words, trying to articulate feelings that had been buried for so long. There were moments when our voices trembled with emotion, and other times when we were so silent that the weight of the unspoken words felt like it might crush us. But we kept going. We talked about the past, about the things we had lost, the things we had failed to do, the things we wished we could change. We talked about the present, the way we were living, the way we were coping. And most importantly, we talked about the future, the things we still wanted, the things we hoped for. The more we spoke, the more I realized how much we had been holding back. We had both been too afraid to confront the truth, but now that we were saying it out loud, it felt like a weight was lifting off our shoulders. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And I could see the relief in Ethan's eyes as he started to let go of some of the pain he had been carrying. It was in that moment, as we sat across from each other at the table, that I realized something important. Healing wasn't just about facing the past. It was about speaking the truth, no matter how hard it was. It was about breaking the silence and allowing ourselves to feel everything we had been avoiding. We couldn't heal until we were honest with each other and with ourselves. What happens when we face the guilt of our own mistakes? Can we ever forgive ourselves for the times we failed those we loved most? The days that followed our conversation felt like a slow rebuild. There was something different in the air between Ethan and me, something that hadn't been there before, an unspoken understanding, a sense of mutual respect that we had not realized we were missing. We had opened the door to a better understanding of each other, and while it didn't erase the pain, it gave us both something to hold on to. We weren't fixed, no, not by a long shot, but we were healing. Still, even though we had started the process of moving forward, there was a heaviness that lingered in the back of my mind. We had spoken about so much, our fears, our hopes, the things we had been carrying for far too long, but there was one thing that still remained unaddressed: guilt. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply I had let Ethan down. I had been so focused on my own struggles that I hadn't seen how much he was suffering. I hadn't truly been there for him when he needed me the most. And that thought, that realization, ate away at me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Could I ever forgive myself for failing him? I knew that Ethan was carrying his own guilt. I had seen it in the way he looked at me when we spoke about the past, in the way he sometimes withdrew into himself as if afraid to let me see the weight of his regrets. He was so used to carrying everything alone, to shouldering the responsibility for both of us, that he hadn't realized he was the one who needed forgiveness, too. I tried to push it out of my mind, to focus on the progress we were making, but every time I looked at him, the guilt returned. I wanted to tell him that I was sorry, that I should have been better for him, but the words never came. How could I apologize for something so big, so overwhelming? Could my apology even be enough? It was a rainy evening when it happened, the kind of night where the world outside feels muffled, where the soft sound of the rain tapping against the windows makes everything feel more intimate. Ethan had just come back from work, and I could see that he was tired, more tired than usual. He sat down at the kitchen table, rubbing his eyes as if he could somehow erase the fatigue. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Even though I was carrying a weight I wasn't sure how to put into words. "How was work today?" He looked up at me with a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Same as always," he replied, his voice flat. "Busy." I wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but something held me back. He didn't want to talk about work, and I didn't want to push him. Instead, I sat down across from him, the silence between us stretching on longer than either of us would have liked. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "I've been thinking," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, "about everything, about the way I've been with you, about how I haven't been there when you needed me. And I just wanted to say that I'm sorry." Ethan's head snapped up at my words, and I could see the surprise in his eyes. It wasn't that he hadn't expected an apology, but the weight of it hit him differently. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with a mixture of confusion and something else, something I couldn't quite read. "You don't need to apologize," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I've been so focused on trying to fix everything that I didn't even realize how much I was hurting you." I felt my chest tighten at his words. Was he really apologizing to me? I hadn't expected this. Not at all. I had thought that it was only me who felt the weight of my mistakes, but Ethan had been carrying his own burden. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I wasn't there for you. I didn't see how much you were struggling. I was so caught up in my own world that I didn't even ask how you were doing. I should have been more aware of what you needed." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't know how to fix this, Lily," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how to make up for everything I've done. I've failed you." "Ethan," I said gently, my heart aching for him, "you haven't failed me. We've both made mistakes, but that doesn't mean we can't forgive ourselves. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it, and we can move forward together." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something in his eyes, vulnerability. Acknowledging his mistakes wasn't easy for him, but I could see that he was trying. He was trying to heal just like I was. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," he whispered, looking down at his hands. "I don't know if I can ever make up for all the times I let you down." "You don't have to make up for it," I said softly, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "You just have to be willing to try. We both do." There was a long silence as we sat there, the weight of our words settling between us. Neither of us had all the answers, but in that moment, we understood something important. The journey wasn't about perfection. It was about forgiveness, both of each other and ourselves. And though the road ahead would still be difficult, it felt a little less heavy knowing we were facing it together. Can we ever truly break free from the mistakes of the past? Or are we destined to repeat them? How do we trust ourselves again when we've let ourselves down before? The days following our heartfelt conversation were filled with small but significant changes. It wasn't that everything suddenly became perfect, but there was a shift, subtle at first, like a breeze brushing against a leaf, but undeniable. Ethan and I were no longer pretending. We had faced the hardest truths, and now it was time to move forward. But there was still a question hanging in the air, one neither of us could avoid. Could we trust ourselves not to make the same mistakes again? I found myself asking that question more often than I cared to admit. I didn't want to go back to the way things had been, to that suffocating silence where we both lived in fear of confronting the truth. I didn't want to repeat the same patterns, the same mistakes. But how could we be sure that we wouldn't? Ethan, too, seemed to be grappling with the same fears. I could see it in the way he interacted with me, the small pauses before he spoke, the hesitance in his eyes when we talked about the future. It wasn't that he didn't want to move forward. It was that he wasn't sure how to trust himself again. And that, more than anything, worried me. Trust was fragile, like glass. Once shattered, it was almost impossible to piece it back together perfectly. I knew that we had to rebuild it, but I wasn't sure where to start. Could we really trust ourselves not to fall into the same traps, not to hurt each other again? One evening, as we sat in the living room, I noticed Ethan staring out the window, his expression distant. I had come to recognize these moments, the times when he was lost in thought, when the weight of his emotions became too heavy for him to carry alone. It was during these moments that I saw the cracks, the vulnerability that he tried so hard to hide. I walked over to him, sitting down beside him on the couch. I didn't say anything at first, just sat quietly, letting the silence settle between us. Sometimes I found that words weren't necessary. Sometimes all we needed was to be present with each other, to simply exist in the same space without the pressure of speaking. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I'm scared, Lily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that I'll mess everything up again, that I'll make the same mistakes, that I'll hurt you again." I felt my heart ache at his words. I knew how much he hated feeling this way, how much he hated the thought of letting anyone down. But it wasn't just me he was worried about. It was himself. "I know," I said softly. "I'm scared too, but we can't keep living in fear of making mistakes. If we do, we'll never move forward. We'll be stuck just like we were before." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for something, anything that would reassure him. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We've made mistakes," I continued, my voice steady but full of emotion. "We can't undo them, but we can learn from them. And we can choose to be better. We don't have to repeat the same patterns. Not if we're willing to try." Ethan's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope in them. I could see that he was struggling, that he was still haunted by the guilt of his past actions, but I also saw that he was willing to try to fight for something better. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't know if I can trust myself again." "You don't have to do it all at once," I said gently. "Just take it one day at a time. Trust yourself in small ways first. And trust me, too. I believe in you, Ethan. I believe in us." He took a deep breath, as if weighing my words carefully. There was a long silence between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that spoke of understanding, of acceptance. We both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we also knew that we were stronger now, having faced our fears together. "I want to believe that we can do this," Ethan said finally, his voice filled with a quiet determination. I want to believe that we can move forward without the fear of repeating the past. We can, I said firmly, looking him in the eye. But it starts with trusting ourselves and trusting each other. As we sat there, side by side, the weight of our past mistakes seemed to lift, if only for a moment. We had broken the silence, faced our fears, and started the process of rebuilding. It wasn't a perfect solution, and I knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but I also knew that we were no longer prisoners of our past. We were free to create something new, something better. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't always be smooth, but it was a start, and that was enough for now. What do we do when the road ahead feels unclear, when the future seems to be hidden behind a veil of uncertainty? Can we still find the courage to move forward when we don't know what lies ahead? The days following that conversation felt like we were walking on a tightrope, trying to find our balance without falling into the abyss of fear or uncertainty. Ethan and I were closer than ever, but there was still so much unknown. We had taken steps toward healing, toward rebuilding trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were just starting a journey. We had no map, no clear path, only the willingness to move forward together, even if we didn't know exactly where that would lead. I spent many nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the future would hold for us. Would we be able to make it? Would we still be able to trust each other a year from now? Or would the cracks in our relationship, the scars of the past, come back to haunt us? I couldn't answer those questions, and neither could Ethan. There were moments when I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, when he would look at me as if trying to read my thoughts, as if searching for some sign that we were going to be okay. He didn't say it, but I could feel it, the fear that things might fall apart again, that we might not be strong enough to overcome our past mistakes. But we had come so far, hadn't we? We had opened up to each other in ways we never had before. And though there were still 1,000 things unsaid between us, I knew that the most important thing was that we were trying. We were fighting for each other, fighting for the future we both wanted. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring out the window at the sun setting behind the trees. The warm golden light flooded the room, casting long shadows across the floor. I had a sense of peace, a fleeting moment of clarity, as I watched the world go by. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. Ethan walked into the room, his footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. He paused next to me, and I felt the familiar presence of him beside me, the quiet strength that he had always offered, even when I hadn't fully appreciated it. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle. I turned to look at him, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. How was I feeling? I was scared, uncertain, hopeful, and lost all at once. But I knew that I couldn't keep hiding from those feelings anymore. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice soft. "I don't know what the future holds. Ethan, I don't know if we can really move forward or if we're just fooling ourselves. But at the same time, I'm starting to believe that maybe we can. Maybe we have a chance." Ethan's expression softened, and he took a step closer to me, his hand brushing mine. "I feel the same way," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm scared, too. I don't know what will happen next, but I want to believe that we can make it, that we can be better." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a spark of confidence, of determination. It wasn't the kind of confidence that comes from having all the answers, but the kind that comes from accepting the uncertainty and still choosing to move forward anyway. "We don't need to have it all figured out," I said softly. "We just need to keep moving, even if it's one step at a time. Together." Ethan nodded, and for a moment we stood there in silence, simply existing together. It wasn't an easy silence, but it was a comforting one, a silence that spoke of understanding, of mutual respect. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, There was a sense of calm between us. We ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence that had often filled our home in the past. This time it was different. This time, it was a silence filled with shared understanding, a silence that told me that no matter how uncertain the future was, we were facing it together. The days that followed were filled with the same quiet progress. Ethan and I still had our moments of doubt, moments where the weight of the past seemed too heavy to bear, but we also had moments of joy, small victories that reminded us that we were on the right path. We laughed more, talked more, and let go of the fear that had once held us hostage. But there was still one thing I had to face: the fear of what might happen if we stumbled again. The fear that, no matter how hard we tried, we might never be able to fully overcome the damage we had caused each other. I didn't know if we could avoid making the same mistakes. I didn't know if we could escape the shadows of our past. But what I did know, with a certainty I hadn't had before, was that we weren't going to give up. Not this time. How do we find the strength to protect what we've worked so hard to rebuild? Can we trust ourselves and each other enough to take that final step toward healing? The weeks following that conversation felt like a turning point. We had spent so much time being afraid, being stuck in the past, that it was hard to believe we were finally starting to move forward. Ethan and I had come a long way since the days when we couldn't even speak without fighting. But there was still a lingering question between us, one we hadn't been able to shake. Could we keep moving forward? Could we trust each other enough to truly heal? Or were we always going to be haunted by our past mistakes? It was a question that had no easy answer. And yet, I found myself growing more certain every day that we had to try. We couldn't keep living in the shadows of what we had done, constantly fearing that it would all fall apart again. It wasn't just about forgiving each other. It was about forgiving ourselves. It was about finding peace within ourselves so that we could build something new, something lasting. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The world around me was quiet, peaceful. The rustling of the trees, the chirping of the birds. It all felt so simple, so right. And in that moment, I realized something: we didn't need to have all the answers. We didn't need to know exactly what the future would hold. What mattered was that we had each other, that we were willing to keep fighting for what we had. I looked over at Ethan, who was sitting beside me, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing. There was still so much uncertainty in the world, but there was one thing we could control: our decision to keep moving forward together. "I've been thinking a lot," I said softly, breaking the silence, "about how far we've come, about how much we've changed." Ethan turned to look at me, his eyes full of curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I mean, look at us," I said, gesturing around us. "A few months ago, we were barely speaking. We couldn't even be in the same room without feeling this tension, this anger. And now, here we are, talking, being honest with each other, trying to rebuild what we had." He nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. "Yeah, it's been a journey," he said quietly, "but I think we're getting there. I think we can make it." I smiled at him, feeling a surge of warmth in my chest. "I think we can, too." The days that followed were filled with small moments of growth. We didn't rush things, we couldn't, but we allowed ourselves to take things one day at a time, making small decisions, moving forward slowly but surely. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We had been through so much, but now we were finally beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. There were still moments of doubt, of course. There were days when I wondered if we were really making progress, if we would ever be able to fully trust each other again. But each time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of how far we had come. I reminded myself that we were both trying, that we both wanted the same thing: to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward together. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, watching a movie, I turned to Ethan and asked the question that had been on my mind for a while. Do you think we'll ever be able to forget the past? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at me for a long moment, as if considering my words carefully. Finally, he answered, his voice steady and calm. I don't think we'll ever forget, he said softly, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's about learning from it. Maybe it's about letting go of the fear that holds us back and choosing to move forward anyway. His words resonated deeply with me. He was right. We didn't need to forget the past, but we needed to stop letting it control us. We needed to stop living in fear of repeating the same mistakes, because that fear was the very thing that was holding us back from fully embracing the future. And so we kept moving forward. Step by step, day by day, we rebuilt what we had lost. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but we were no longer afraid to face them. We had each other, and that was enough. In the end, I realized that healing wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. It was about learning to trust ourselves again, learning to trust each other again, and letting go of the past so that we could embrace the future. And most importantly, it was about choosing to move forward, no matter how uncertain or difficult the journey might be. We had come so far, and there was still so much more to learn, but I knew one thing for sure. We were no longer stuck. We were no longer prisoners of our past. We were free, and we were ready for whatever the future had in store.